Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is the place where we take really complex research, dense academic sources.
And try to make sense of them.
Exactly. We analyze your source material, pull out the most critical ideas, and get you informed and fast. So today we're doing a deep dive into something really fundamental, the physics and I guess, financial engine of life itself.
That's a good way to put it. We're talking about bioenergetics, or biochemical thermodynamics, if you want the full name.
And we're going to be focusing on the absolute star of that show, adenosine triphosphate. You know it as ATP.
And this is so vital because really we're talking about the body's entire economy. Biological systems, unlike, say, a car engine, are isothermic.
Meaning they're at a constant temperature.
Right. They can't use heat to do work, so they have to be powered by something else, and that something is controlled, chemical energy, and understanding that energy balance is directly tied to clinical medicine. I mean, think about just normal nutrition.
Then you get fuel into the system.
Exactly. How you capture it, how you release it, malnutrition, something like marasmus. That's just a catastrophic failure of this whole energy supply system.
And it's not just about deficits, right?
Yeah.
The regulatory side, especially with modern diseases, is all about surplus.
Precisely. You have things like thyroid hormones that are basically the thermostat for the whole operation. They control the metabolic rate.
The speed of energy release.
The speed of energy release. And then in our society, the storage of excess energy is what drives obesity, which then, predisposes people to things like cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes.
It all goes back to this.
It all boils down to the simple in and out of energy.
Okay, so let's unpack this. If we're going to understand the cell's economy, we have to start with the basic rules of the universe.
Good.
The laws of thermodynamics.
We have to. And the key metric, the number we always track in biochemistry, is the Gibbs change in free energy. We call it delta G.
Delta G. And that's not the total energy, right?
No, that's the key. It's the useful energy, the chemical potential that's actually available to do work in the cell. It's the only energy that matters on the cell's balance sheet. The first law is pretty straightforward. It's just conservation. Energy is constant.
It changes form, but it's never lost or gained.
Exactly. Chemical energy can become mechanical for movement or heat or electrical, but the total amount stays the same.
Okay, simple enough. But then there's the famous, or maybe infamous, second law of thermodynamics. That's where things get tricky for life.
It is the ultimate spoiler. The second law says that the total entropy, which is just a measure of disorder or randomness.
Chaos.
Chaos, exactly. The total entropy of a system and its surroundings has to increase for anything to happen spontaneously. Equilibrium is just maximum chaos.
But life is the opposite of chaos. It's building these incredibly complex, ordered structures that decrease in entropy.
It is. So life has to be paying a huge energy price somewhere else to make the universe as a whole more chaotic. And that's where delta G tells us the fate of a reaction. If delta G is negative, free energy is lost from the system and the reaction just happens. It's spontaneous. We call it exergonic.
And if you want to build something, like a protein, that takes energy.
Right. Then your delta G is positive, the reaction is endergonic, it requires a net gain of free energy, and it won't happen on its own. It stalls.
And a delta G of 0 means you're at equilibrium. Nothing's happening.
Stasis.
Just a quick note for everyone listening. On the notation, when you see delta G with a little 0 and a prime symbol next to it.
Delta G 0 prime.
Yeah, that little prime symbol is really important. It just means the calculation has been standardized for the conditions inside a cell. Specifically, pH 7.0.
That's a critical point. And we have to stress one other thing before we move on. Enzymes, they're just catalysts.
They speed things up.
They speed things up, but that's it. An enzyme can help you get to equilibrium faster, but it can never, ever change what that final equilibrium is. It can't change the delta G.
It only accelerates what's already possible.
That's it.
Okay, so that constraint that all the important things a cell does, like building things or moving muscles, are endergonic and can't happen alone, that seems like a massive problem. How does a cell not just go bankrupt?
The solution is, well, it's elegant. It's called coupling.
Coupling.
You can only make an endergonic process happen if you link it, you couple it, to a much more powerful exergonic process. The rule is that the overall net change for the whole system has to be exergonic.
The system as a whole has to lose free energy.
Right, and this gives us the two halves of metabolism. You have catabolism, which is the exergonic side breaking down fuel, releasing energy.
And anabolism.
Anabolism, that's the endergonic side, the synthetic reactions that build things up and, they require that energy. Metabolism is just the sum of those two.
And the sources we looked at laid out two main ways this coupling actually happens. The first is a common obligatory intermediate.
Right. In that case, the two reactions literally share a metabolite. They're physically linked. And so mass action can drive the whole thing forward. What's really cool about that is it gives you immediate feedback. The rate you use up the final product controls how fast you burn the initial fuel.
Which is the basis for what's called respiratory control.
Exactly. It stops your metabolic engine from just running wide open and burning out.
But the second mechanism, this feels like the real game changer for the whole cell, the high-energy intermediate method.
It is. It's the defining feature of life's economy. Instead of sharing a metabolite, the exergonic reaction makes a small, mobile, high-energy compound.
Like ATP.
Like ATP.
Yeah.
And this little molecule then physically moves over to the endergonic reaction and basically pays the energy bill to drive it forward. The genius here is that this high-energy compound, it acts as a universal transducer, a universal currency.
It doesn't have to look like the things it's paying for.
Not at all. It's just a portable packet of energy that can connect any energy source to any energy-requiring process. Building a membrane, firing a nerve, contracting a muscle. ATP pays for it all.
All right, let's focus in on the star then. ATP.
Yeah.
What is it structurally?
At its core, it's an adenosine molecule that's the base adenine plus a ribose sugar, and then it has a tail of 3 phosphate groups strung together.
And those phosphate bonds are where the magic is.
That's where the power is stored. And in the cell, it's always complex with a magnesium ion. We measure that power using something called the group transfer potential, which is basically just a fancy way of saying we measure the tendency of that last phosphate group to jump off onto another molecule.
And we measure that by seeing how much energy is released when you just cut it off with water, right? The hydrolysis.
Yep. The delta G0 prime of hydrolysis. For ATP turning into ADP in a loose phosphate, that number is minus 30.5 kilojoules per mole.
And that number, negative 30.5, that's the baseline. It's like the $20 bill of the cell.
It is. It neatly divides all the other phosphorylated compounds. You have the high-energy phosphates, which are even more powerful than ATP. Things like phosphoryl pyruvate or creatine phosphate.
They have a more negative delta G.
Much more negative. They can easily donate a phosphate to ADP to make ATP.
And on the other side are the low-energy phosphates.
Right. Things like glucose-6-phosphate, they are the recipients. ATP easily donates its phosphate to them.
But why is ATP itself considered high energy? I mean, you just said other things are more powerful.
It's a great question. It comes down to the physical structure. When you break that bond between the last 2 phosphates, 2 huge things happen. First, you get relief of charge repulsion.
So those phosphates are all negatively charged and they're crammed together. They want to fly apart.
They are repelling each other like crazy. Breaking the bond is like releasing a compressed spring, a massive release of tension.
Okay, that makes sense.
And second, the products, especially that free phosphate molecule, are way more stable than the ATP molecule was. They can spread out that negative charge over multiple oxygen atoms. We call that resonance stabilization.
So more stable products means the reaction is more likely to go in that direction.
Hopefully so.
So ADP is positioned kind of in the middle of the energy scale, not the most powerful, but much more powerful than the things it needs to activate. That's what makes it so perfect.
It's the perfect middleman. And this creates the ATP-EDP cycle. It's just constantly running, linking energy generation to energy use.
But here's the detail from the sources that just blew my mind. The actual amount of ATP in a cell at any one time is tiny.
It is shockingly small.
How small are we talking?
We're talking about enough to keep an active tissue, like a muscle, running for maybe a few seconds.
A few seconds. That's it.
That's it. Which means that regeneration has to be unbelievably fast and constant.
So if the battery is that small, what are the big power plants that are constantly recharging it? Our sources pointed to 3 main ones.
The undisputed champion for any organism that breathes oxygen is oxidative phosphorylation.
The electron transport chain.
Yep. It generates the vast majority of ATP as oxygen gets reduced to water.
Okay, what's number 2?
Number 2 is glycolysis, the breakdown of glucose. That gives you a net of 2 high-energy phosphates per glucose molecule.
And the third is smaller.
Much smaller. You get one single high-energy phosphate generated directly in the citric acid cycle at the succinate thiokinase step.
And because that battery is so small, you'd need some kind of backup for sudden, intense demand, like sprinting. That's where phosphagens come in.
Phosphagens are the cell's immediate savings account. In us vertebrates, it's creatine phosphate.
Creatine phosphate. You hear about that with athletes.
Exactly. It's a rapid buffer. When you suddenly contract a muscle, creatine phosphate instantly donates its high-energy phosphate to ADP to remake ATP, maintaining the supply. Then when the muscle rests and ATP levels are high again, the process reverses and you recharge the creatine phosphate store.
A quick access energy reserve.
Precisely.
Let's make this concrete. Let's look at that classic example of coupling. Activating a glucose molecule.
Yeah.
If you just try to stick a phosphate on glucose, that reaction is highly endergonic. It won't happen.
It needs about positive 13.8 kilojoules per mole. It's a non-starter.
But if you couple it with ATP hydrolysis, which releases 30.5,
Catalyzed by the enzyme hexokinase, the whole equation flips. The overall reaction becomes highly exergonic. It proceeds easily and, crucially, becomes irreversible inside the cell.
and that's the blueprint for basically every activation reaction.
It is. You pay with ATP to make something happen that couldn't happen on its own.
So the cell is spending this currency, but it also needs to, manage its budget.
Yeah.
This brings us to a really key regulatory enzyme, adenyl kinase.
Also called myokinase, and its job is energy homeostasis. It catalyzes the reaction. ATP plus AMP goes to 2 ADP.
So it's a rebalancing act.
It's the ultimate energy umpire. It does a few things. First, it can take 2 ADP molecules and make 1 ATP, salvaging some energy. Second, it helps recycle AMP, which is a byproduct of a lot of activation reactions.
But the sources really emphasized its third role as a signal.
Absolutely. This is the brilliant part. When ATP levels really plummet, like in a crisis, AMP levels spike up disproportionately.
Okay.
And that AMP molecule isn't just waste. It becomes a powerful allosteric signal. It's the cell's low-fuel warning light. It binds to key enzymes in the catabolic pathways and screams, "Make more ATP now!"
What if a cell needs to do something really expensive, a double debit transaction? That's the pyrophosphate pathway, right?
Yeah.
Where ATP goes all the way to AMP plus PPI.
Right. PPI is pyrophosphate. This happens for reactions that need a huge energy push, like activating a long-chain fatty acid.
So why is that so much more powerful?
It's a 2-for-1 punch. First, the initial hydrolysis of ATP to AMP and PPI is already very exergonic. But then the cell have another enzyme, inorganic pyrophosphatase.
And its only job is to destroy that PPI byproduct.
Instantly. And that second reaction is also highly exergonic. So by immediately removing one of the products, you use Le Chatelier's principle to pull the original activation reaction irreversible to the right.
You make it absolutely certain to happen.
Guaranteed. But it's expensive. It costs you 2 high-energy phosphate bonds to do it.
One last detail before we recap. ATP isn't the only game in town, though it's the main one. We have UTP, GTP.
Right. And there are enzymes called nucleoside diphosphate kinases that can take, say, a UDP molecule and use an ATP to turn it into UTP.
So ATP is the primary currency, but it also funds all the other specialized currencies the cell needs for specific jobs.
Exactly. ATP runs the general economy and also finances the specialty departments. So to bring this all home for you, let's just recap the biggest takeaways here.
Let's go.
First, everything is governed by the laws of thermodynamics. Delta G determines if a reaction is spontaneous. If it's positive, you need a workaround.
And that workaround is coupling.
That's takeaway number 2. Endergonic processes, which is what life is mostly about, are only possible because they are always coupled to more powerful exergonic processes. And third, ATP is that universal currency. It's perfectly positioned in the middle of the energy scale. It's the ideal bridge to collect energy from big sources, like burning fuel, and then spend it on all the little jobs that need doing in the cell.
And here's a final thought to leave you with, just building on the genius of this system. Despite all the complexity of human life, your brain, your muscles, all of it, the total amount of ready cash in your cells, that ATP pool, is only enough for a few seconds of work.
Just a few seconds.
The entire incredibly complex regulatory system we just talked about, adenyl kinase, phosphachannels, all of it, exists purely to micromanage those few fleeting seconds of energy, to ensure that in a moment of crisis, the lights don't go out.
It's life on an energetic razor's edge.
Thank you for engaging in this deep dive into your sources. We hope you feel thoroughly informed.